This is Special Session. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Bryan Schott, publisher and managing editor of Utah Political Watch. The big news today, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Denver just revived my lawsuit against the Utah Legislature over the denial of my press credential. That's a major First Amendment win. I break down exactly what the court said, what happens next, and why it matters for every independent journalist in the state. That's coming up on the show. We'll talk about the wide-open race to replace outgoing Senate President Stuart Adams, Governor Spencer Cox's statewide fireworks ban, and some national news that has some Utah implications, the Supreme Court's birthright citizenship ruling, a blockbuster campaign finance decision, and growing speculation that Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito is about to retire. If that happens, you can expect that Senator Mike Lee's name will come up again as the nominee to fill the vacancy on that court. Before we get into the program, if you're watching or listening right now, make sure that you hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've got a minute, leave us a rating and review. It helps more people find the show. And none of this happens without you. Utah Political Watch is journalist-owned, journalist-operated. No corporations, no billionaires bankrolling us. If you want to help keep independent accountability journalism alive in this state, head on over to utahpolitics.news, sign up for our free newsletter, and if you're able, become a paying subscriber or just toss a few bucks into the tip jar. All of it makes a difference. Okay, let's get into the show. Today is a big day. We got a lot to talk about. And one of the best things to talk about is the fact that the 10th Circuit Court in Denver revived my lawsuit against the Utah Legislature for denying me a press pass. They said that I had credibly alleged viewpoint discrimination. The fact that in my complaint, I said that the reason that they denied me a press pass is because they didn't like what I wrote. And that looks like the reason why they denied me a press pass. And so my lawsuit had been dismissed by the 10th Circuit Court, by the District Court here in Utah. And now it is revived and we're back on track. So I'm pretty excited about that. But I am pretty chuffed right now. Let's put it that way. I'm chuffed. I don't know if you saw, but we all know that billionaire, investor, developer Kevin O'Leary is backtracking after accusing Alliance for a Better Utah, the Elevate Utah Girls, a few other people of being funded by the Chinese Communist Party as part of their opposition to a Stratos data center. He's now come out and said he's got no evidence. Fox News had to apologize. That's because probably somebody threatened a lawsuit. So Fox News came out and apologized for airing that. And Kevin O'Leary has said that he has no knowledge of that. And today, Senator Todd Weiler posted on social media that he got duped. He got duped because he amplified those claims as well. And that just tells me that, the lawsuit has been threatened and they don't want to have to scratch a check. But I am hoping that Kevin O'Leary does have to write somebody a check because his allegations were they were ridiculous on their face. And if you even got half a brain cell, you know that he's not, that he has no evidence to back that up. But he went with them, and a bunch of people here in Utah did. A woman who hosts a political podcast that I like to refer to as a crap shack political podcast has been all in on these claims that the Elevate Utah Girls are funded by the communist Chinese, and there's no evidence. She's not going to apologize, but she should, because, like I said, if you've got half a brain cell, it's bullshit. Connor House on Instagram. And we can talk a little about this. The Josh James video. Did you see that? The Josh James DUI video? Oh, boy. And he is very, very close to Spencer Cox. I remember just a couple of years ago, he was like he was leading the legislature around by the nose, but he got popped for a DUI, and you got to hope that he gets the help he needs. But it was an ugly, ugly scene, and I mean his business is really in trouble right now, from what I understand. But that was quite I would look it up. I think it was published by Business Insider. I think they had the exclusive. We can talk about Josh James. We can talk about Todd Weiler saying, whoops, I'm sorry. I amplified these claims that, I should have known better. And yes, he should have known better. But that hasn't stopped people. That doesn't stop people. People get loose on social media all the time. We can talk about how the Senate is going to change now that Senate President Stuart Adams is on his way out. It looks like the two main contenders for Senate President are current Majority Leader Kirk Cullimore and former Majority Leader Evan Vickers. I've talked to a bunch of people today, and they said that those are the two most likely to run for that seat. And that's going to be an interesting contest. It's been described to me that if Cullimore wins that, it will be a continuation, or it'll pretty much be the same business as usual as we had under Adams. But if Vickers wins, and he was in line to become Senate President, I think that thought he was going to run a couple of years ago, but Adams just decided he wanted to stay in the job. Not now. But Vickers has, from what I'm told, he has been talking to people about trying to restore trust in the institution. That's what he wants to do. And I have no doubt that he would try to do that. I've known Senator Vickers for quite a while, and he's always treated me with respect. I've always treated him with respect. I've known Senator Cullimore, too. I used to be a youth soccer ref, and I would ref his kids' games all the time. We'd chat after the games. So I've known both of them. But that's what I'm hearing, that those two are probably going to be the two running for Senate president. Once they'll have those elections right after the elections in November, like a day or two afterwards. That's when the Senate will elect new leadership. That's when the House will elect new leadership. And they're going to have to, I'm guessing there will have to be some deals made, because whoever becomes Senate President, they can dangle a couple of pretty plum assignments to try to get someone on board. Because right now, the Senate chair of the Executive Appropriations Committee is Jerry Stevenson. He's leaving, so that seat is going to be open. And you can also, and whoever it is, they can also dangle someone to be the chair of Senate Rules. Sigma Deb on TikTok asks, how would Vickers deal with suspending rules at the end of the session? That's just a common thing. They just do that in the interest of time. They're not doing anything illegal. I suspect that they would suspend the rules. They always do that. They always do that to move things across because they're running out of time. At 45 days, we have one of the shortest legislative sessions in the country. It's not the shortest, but it's one of the shortest. And really, they're only up there for 33 days because they don't work weekends. So when you hear them saying suspending the rules, they're not doing anything sketchy. What they're doing is they're trying to speed up the process because they's running out of time. They also suspend the rules at the beginning of the session to move bills that have been approved by interim committees across and get those through the process. So I don't really see anything. I suspect it would be the same process. What you're going to see is whoever's in charge of different committees, because the Senate president, they usually say it's in conjunction with the majority leader, but under Adams, it was pretty much Adams deciding who was assigned to which committee, who was the chair of which committee. And pretty much every Republican in the Senate gets to chair a committee. It's not that way in the House. There's just too many Republicans in the House. So let's talk about, and I know this isn't the biggest news today, but I think it's the best news today. And if you didn't see my posts on social media, if you weren't with us right at the beginning of the show, if you didn't read the article I wrote, as you know, I was denied a press credential by the Utah Legislature. I started Utah Political Watch in 2024 as an independent outlet, and right after that, they rewrote their rules to say that blogs, independent media, freelance journalists cannot get a press credential. What does having a press credential mean? Well, it means that you get access to press conferences with legislative leadership, with legislators, the governor's press conference, press events at the Capitol. You get access to all of that. You get access to the press room. There's press parking, whatever, up at the Capitol. But those are the things that having a press credential has. And they said that if you are an independent media, blog, independent media, freelance journalist, you're not eligible to get a press credential. They changed those rules right after I became an independent journalist. I applied. They said I couldn't have one. So in January of 2025, I sued. I sued the legislature claiming viewpoint discrimination. I said that they denied me having a press credential because they didn't like what I wrote. The fact that they made up rules after I filed suit claiming I didn't have an editor. I didn't have, there wasn't corporate oversight. I wasn't, you had to be part of a reputable news organization who files a code of ethics. So I couldn't have one. But I was the only journalist who was not given a press credential. Same thing for this last year in 2026. So I filed suit. And late last year, I think last September or so, that suit was dismissed. It was tossed out by the judge in the district court here in Utah. This is at the federal level, not at the state level, because we were alleging a First Amendment violation. So that's a federal case. We appealed that case to the 10th Circuit Court in Denver. They had oral arguments back in the middle of March, a couple of months ago. We argued, they argued. It was in front of a 3-judge panel. And today, this morning, I got an email from my lawyer. They're with the Institute of Free Speech, ifs.org. They're great people. They do this all the time. They represent journalists in these First Amendment cases. And I got an email from my lawyer saying, we won our appeal. They revived my lawsuit. Now, they upheld some of the dismissals. There were 5 allegations in my original lawsuit. They upheld 2 of them. And they are the most important ones. That the reason why they changed the rules, the reason why they didn't give me a press pass is because because they didn't write they didn't like what I wrote. That's it. That's viewpoint discrimination. So they revived the lawsuit. So we're alive again. And now we go back down to the 10th Circuit, to the Utah District Court, where we get to actually argue this case. The 10th Circuit Court today said that the district court erred when they dismissed the case because they said that I adequately alleged that the credentialing system that the legislature has put in place creates what they call a government forum. And when they do that government forum, because it's not an area the public can access, so it's a government forum. When they create that forum, they have to administer it in a viewpoint neutral way. And the 10th Circuit Court unanimously, all 3 judges said that's not what happened here. In our suit, we said that legislative staffers called my reporting, quote, unprofessional. They said I lacked integrity. There were several outlets that were similar in structure to mine that got credentials. So they're not even applying their own rules uniformly. That's viewpoint discrimination. From the order, we conclude that Schott's well-pleaded factual allegations are sufficient to show the legislature plausibly discriminated against him because of his viewpoints. They also so in their defense, the legislature claimed that I wasn't harmed by not getting a press credential. It didn't cause any harm because I could sit in the gallery at the Capitol. I couldn't sit at the press tables, but I could sit in the gallery and watch the procedures. I could go to committee hearings. And if they had press conferences, I could just watch the live stream, or I could see a recording of it afterward. So that was no big deal. No big deal at all. But from their opinion, they said the policy itself states that credentialed media enjoy privileges such as access to some secure areas of the Capitol, the press room, and to media availabilities and other press events with elected officials. The public has no access to such areas and events, the court wrote. The obvious problem, this is from their opinion, the obvious problem is that Schott cannot ask legislative officials questions without attending press conferences in person. You think? You think you're unable to ask questions if you're not there in person? But again, if you think about it, that's kind of the whole point. They didn't want me in the room asking questions because they didn't like what I wrote. So the court has sent those two claims on viewpoint discrimination back down to the Utah court, the district court here in Utah. And now that court gets to determine whether the policy is viewpoint based. It upheld the dismissal of a few of the other claims in my case that that this was retaliation. They were retaliating against me. They call it prior restraint. That means that the press credential policy is so broad that it gives the government broad powers to deny or grant the press credentials. And they also said, we also claimed that it was just way too vague in some of the terminology they used, and they upheld those dismissals. But the two counts on viewpoint discrimination, which are First Amendment issues, they revived those claims, sent them back down to the district court. So that means now we get to have a First Amendment fight in the district court if the legislature chooses to continue this fight. Remember, they are paying a boutique law firm in Washington, D.C. to defend them in this case, and they've already spent almost $500,000 defending in this case to deny me and me alone a press credential because I'm the only one who didn't get one. So that's where things sit. It's still alive. The legislature, they have 14 days to ask for a rehearing in front of the 10th Circuit if they choose to do so. And I don't know if they will. Maybe. It depends on how long they want to drag this out. That's what this whole thing depends on. How long they want to drag it out. On TikTok, Random Quokka says, I'm curious what next steps and timeline look is the press pass case, and do you think this will be resolved before the next session? I hope so. I hope so. But this also means that I can now again ask for a preliminary injunction, which means they would be forced to give me a press credential while the rest of this stuff plays out. I didn't get one last time. As was said before, as I explained before, the district court here in Utah, when they denied my press credential, when they denied my temporary restraining order, when they denied my preliminary injunction, it was all procedural based. It was very procedural. We never even engaged on the merits of the argument. Now I've sat through a deposition. They've sat through a deposition. The next thing, if they choose to continue this, if they do not ask for a rehearing, maybe they will, maybe they don't. I don't have any particular insight on that. But if they choose not to ask for a rehearing and decide to continue to fight this out in court, the next thing would be probably we would go in for another hearing on this and we would set discovery. And that would be really fascinating for me because they would have to start to turn over a whole bunch of emails about how they came up with this, whether they targeted me, which is essentially what the 10th Circuit Court says. They said from the initial filings in the case, I laid out a pretty compelling case that they targeted me, that this was done to target me. But the next thing would be, there would be discovery. People would have to turn over emails. I would love to get a look at their emails. I would love it. You don't think a journalist would love to get access to these emails? Because they would be part of, it would all be in the court documents. I would have access to them. Boy, that would be fascinating. I'm actually kind of salivating a little bit thinking about that. Man, I would love to get a hold of some of those emails. Nathan Detroit on Twitch says, do you think Senate President John Johnson, LOL, is going to keep the lawsuit going? Well, first of all, if John Johnson becomes the Senate president, something has gone horribly wrong with this timeline, and they just need to unplug us and reset everything because we have encountered a fatal error. But that's a pretty good joke. That's a pretty good joke. Another great joke I saw today when I posted this online, Senator Kathleen Reeby, Democrat, Salt Lake City, said she expects the legislature to spend some money to add more judges into the system so that this never happens again. Because that's what they do when they lose lawsuits. And they haven't lost yet, but the fact that they thought that this was probably taken care of, resolved, and now it's not, they don't take those things well. That's a pretty good joke. Adding more money into, or spending more money to add some more judges because of this outcome. It's still a long process, but today was a good day. Today was a day I'd been waiting for quite a while. It came down on the same day that the Supreme Court, 5-4, decided that the Constitution doesn't say what the Constitution says, or they decided it does say that, but 4 members of the court or 3.5 members of the court say the 14th Amendment doesn't say what it says. That birthright citizenship case. And then you've got Senator Mike Lee and other conservatives acting like, they've been thrown out of an airplane because of that decision. Nothing has changed. It's the status quo on the birthright citizenship. But Senator Mike Lee took another L today because the House, trying to pass this Save America Act, tried to get it included with the National Defense Bill, the bill that funds the military. That's one of their must-pass bills. And they tried to attach it to that to get it through, and it failed on a procedural vote because Speaker Mike Johnson is really bad at his job. Like, he's really bad. You thought Kevin McCarthy was bad at his job. Mike Johnson is really bad at his job. And Senator Mike Lee does not have the juice to get this thing passed. Senator John Curtis is walking across the state 250 miles for America's 250th birthday. He probably will see more people on that than are attending the Great American State Fair in Washington, D.C. I'm really sad about what's happening at that Great American State Fair because we could have had a really, really cool celebration of America. The Smithsonian had been planning this for a decade. They had festivals and concerts with giant headliners who are going to be playing these concerts. They were set to go, but their permits were denied by the Trump administration just so the president could slap his name on it. And it is a disaster. It is an utter disaster. Nobody's there. It's just embarrassing. And I'm really sad because we could have had a very, very cool, like a really cool celebration for America's 250th anniversary, which is a big deal. They'd been planning it for years and years and years. But anyway, I'm very, very sad. Very sad about that. I've been having some thoughts about why Senate President Stuart Adams lost, and it was because SB 54 did its job. SB 54 did what it was supposed to. It made him compete for this seat for the first time ever. It made him try to make the case to voters who were not just Republican Party delegates. And you know what? They didn't like him. That's not who they wanted. And that's SB 54 doing its job. And it's part of the reason why the delegate crowd are very upset that this happened, and they've been calling for a repeal of SB 54 for years, because this is the kind of outcome that they don't want. The outcome that they don't want is the diminution of their power. Stuart Adams had to compete for the first time ever for this. He had never had a primary. He had always won the convention in, he always won the vote of convention, always won the nomination convention. And then he cruised to an easy win in November because he had the Republican Party next to his name. That's it. He spent almost $200,000 on this campaign in a losing effort. You want to know how much he spent on his campaign in 2022, the last time he was up for re-election? Take a wild guess. He spent almost $200,000. It's between his campaign and the money his PAC either donated to his campaign or did in an in-kind donation to his campaign for advertising. $200,000 approximately. In 2022, Adams spent $6,131. That's it. Those are the only campaign-related expenses that I could find on his disclosure from 2022, the last time he was on the ballot. That, he didn't have to compete. He did not have to compete for this seat in the past. And that is the reason why he lost, because he had to make his case to a wider universe of voters, and almost 2/3 of them chose someone else. He got about 34% of the vote. The not Adams vote was almost 2/3. And, that means that's what SB 54 was designed to do. We saw it in a couple of other cases. Brady Brammer was forced to compete for his seat in Senate District 21, and he ended up winning. He was chosen by the delegates. His opponent got signatures to get on the ballot, and then they had to take their case to a wider universe of voters. And Brammer ended up winning. And I would also argue that that's SB 54 doing its job. That's what SB 54 is supposed to do. But many in the delegate crowd in the Republican Party would very much like to go back to a system where the delegates are the only ones who control access to the ballot. And the problem with that is, the state owns the ballot. It's not their ballot. It's your ballot. They can nominate parties, but they don't get exclusive access. That's what the courts have ruled in this whole nonsense fight over SB 54 that happened years and years ago. Leslie on TikTok says, do you think Blake Moore could lose his seat? Probably not in November. I mean, anything can happen, right? I think it would have to take a pretty significant Democratic wave to cause that to happen, because it is a very Republican seat. It's rated as R plus 15, meaning that based on the national average, a Republican candidate there would do 15 points better than the baseline Republican candidates, the baseline Republican average for elections. It's not the most Republican seat in the state, but it's up there. But it's R plus 15. So Peter Crosby, who's the Democratic nominee in that race, he's going to have to really it would take a lot of effort. It would take something special. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done. Back in 2018, when Ben McAdams knocked off Mia Love, that was a Democratic wave, and I think the seat was R plus 16 or R plus 17. It was a very Republican seat. And it was a big enough wave that those safe Republican seats in that range of R plus 15, R plus 18, somewhere in there, wherever that seat was, they suddenly became flippable. And remember, McAdams didn't flip it by much. He won by less than 1,000 votes. So I'm not saying that Peter Crosby doesn't have a chance in CD2 against Blake Moore, but it would really take a lot of things going his way. Ryan on TikTok says we need term limits and a new age bracket. I'm not going to argue that you're wrong. I mean, term limits would change a lot of things. There's pros and cons for term limits for sure. But the problem is you're going to have to ask lawmakers to implement a system that disadvantages them. Because Stuart Adams, I can guarantee you, if he had won, he would have been in that seat. And the next time he'd be up for election would be 2030. Yeah, it'd be 2030. He would probably run for re-election again there because he wanted to be in the Senate president, when the Olympics come back to Utah. I can guarantee you he would run for at least two more terms. Not now. I don't think everybody should celebrate too much, because I suspect Stuart Adams is going to he'll land on his feet. He'll still be in government somewhere. He's still the chair of MIDA. His loss does not remove him as the chair of the board of MIDA. Let's talk about this. Katie Ditta just brought this up on YouTube. Representative Matt McPherson in House District 26, West Valley. He's getting bad press. He said he's going to sue the state over the fireworks ban because he's a proprietor of many fireworks stands and optics are bad when the state is burning. That is the thing. We're seeing a lot of people. We're in the middle of an historic drought here in Utah. The state is on fire. We have the largest fire in the United States, the Cottonwood Fire right now. Three firefighters have lost their lives fighting that fire. And so the Governor Spencer Cox, issued a ban on fireworks. Now, it wasn't mandatory. Towns could still create safe areas for fireworks, but I want to say that I'm surprised, but I'm really not surprised that they've turned that into, you're seeing the more libertarian people saying this ban on fireworks is somehow an assault on their freedoms. My freedom, my freedom. And so, that is very tone deaf by Representative McPherson. But don't forget, he's the guy who came up with the Constitutional Court. I believe he was the one who sponsored the bill for that initially. So I don't think that they're worried about that, because they are a Republican supermajority. Although I am surprised that he's not treading a little more lightly after he watched Trevor Lee lose. Although, speaking to lawmakers up on the Hill, so many of them basically thought he was a dead man walking after he got Bob Stevenson as a challenger. It turns out that they were right. But it's astonishing that we're in the middle of this historic drought, the largest fire in the United States. We have firefighters lose their lives fighting this fire. The governor announces a fireworks ban, which is, makes a ton of sense. And you get the more libertarian crowd here in Utah just showing their asses online, yelling about my freedoms. You are infringing on my freedoms. It's my property. I can do what I want. Sure. But probably shouldn't. What does Patton Oswalt say? Spend a lot of time looking at the coulda, but not so much looking at the shoulda. And it's really disappointing that you're hearing that argument. But I think a lot of these people were emboldened during the COVID fight, because I sat up at the legislature when they would hold these marathon hearings about COVID, and they would let people just get up and rant and rave about how mask mandates were just an existential threat to their freedom. They would, there was one particular hearing, I believe it was Senate Business and Labor, maybe it was tax. Anyway, it was one that was chaired by former Senator Kurt Bramble, and they had a bunch of business leaders, and they took public comment for probably 2.5, 3 hours while people just yelled about, these mask mandates, vaccines, what have you. And the problem with that is, I understand, the Republicans up on the Hill love that, because these were their people. These were people who agreed with them politically. These were their voters. The problem is they created a system where these people who were yelling about masks, and the government sat and listened to them and listened to their opinions about masks. They created a system where they thought, oh, you should listen to me about everything. And my opinion should carry the day on everything. And that's how we got into this place where losing an argument was tyranny. Losing an argument was essentially tyranny. And they didn't think they had to make their argument because, lawmakers emboldened them. They were emboldened during this whole process. So they created this monster. And I have spoken to so many legislators, I won't say who, but I'll characterize conversations like this. I will have legislators say to me, these people are crazy. And I will say, you created this monster. You did this. You emboldened them. You gave them a platform. You listened to them because you saw them as a means to an end. And now they're expecting the same kind of treatment all the time. And that's why we are now hearing the more libertarian voices in our community claiming that this fireworks ban is the next round of tyranny because the government cannot tell you what to do on your private property. Sure. But then you're going to expect the government to come in and save your property when you set it on fire. You think about that? You don't think that far ahead because you don't believe in the social contract. It's a social contract, people. I also don't think it is much of a coincidence that Governor Cox felt emboldened enough to announce a statewide fireworks ban after Stuart Adams lost his election. Because you'll remember, right before the election, the governor was saying, there's nothing I can do. I cannot do this. Stuart Adams loses his election, and then all of a sudden, Governor Cox comes out and says, we are having a statewide ban on fireworks. I don't think the two are unrelated because Stuart Adams lost all of his power, lost all of his pull when he lost that election, when he lost his reelection bid. He doesn't tell Governor Cox what to do anymore. I was talking to one person today on the phone, having a conversation about stuff. And one of the things he said to me was, you're going to see Governor Cox find his spine on a number of things now. Because in the past, he was beaten down by this Republican supermajority. I don't know how much of that is going to happen. I think the supermajority is, they're going to decide that they think that they're in charge of everything. This supermajority in the legislature. Crystal Neal Taylor on TikTok says, in public comment at Syracuse City last night, a woman complained because she wants to do fireworks for her birthday. See, that's what I'm saying about the social contract. People don't understand the idea of the common good, the public commons. They don't understand the commons. And, America is, we're a very selfish people, and we don't handle discomfort well. We don't do that. Katie did it on YouTube, going back to Matt McPherson, who I was just as shocked as you are when I saw this, that he was threatening a lawsuit against the state because he has fireworks stand businesses. This was infringing or hurting his business. Katie did it says he actually sued Granite School District over mask mandates. Granite settled with him for something like $30,000. But it's funny when people scream about tyranny from the government, but they're really eager to accept the help from the government when they need it. Like when you need the firefighters to come to your house and put out a fire. Omnipresence88 on TikTok says, my MAGA father-in-law thinks Cox was a Democrat before becoming governor. He's losing support. Cox is a Republican, but he's a different kind of Republican. He's an old school Republican. He's part of the Republican Party that is not coming back and has been supplanted by MAGA. And, say that Cox is losing support. It doesn't matter. He's not running for another term. He's not going to run for governor again. He's done. I don't know what his plans are. I don't know if he thinks he might run for Mike Lee's U.S. Senate seat. Oh, and we need to talk about that because it sure as heck looks like Sam Alito's about to retire. And if that happens, get ready for the Mike Lee to the Supreme Court chatter to start up again. because I can guarantee you he will be on that list for the president. And a lot of the people, there's a lot of speculation in Washington, D.C., that the reason why Senator Lee has been so outrageous on social media. I mean, today he was complaining about the birthright citizenship ruling. Senator Lee's supposedly a constitutional expert. That amendment, the 14th Amendment, is pretty plain in what it says. And today's argument or today's ruling was a textualist ruling. But Senator Lee was complaining about it on social media. And the reason why a lot of people think is because he is auditioning for that Supreme Court role. He wants that. I mean, he wants it so bad he can taste it. And he clerked for Sam Alito twice. I think his son clerked for Sam Alito in one of the recent terms. Expect that chatter to start up again, because Mike Lee is going to be in the mix. He's going to be a significant player for that Supreme Court seat. I don't know if you saw what happened today, but NPR published a story by Nina Totenberg that said Alito was going to retire, and then they pulled it down. And they claimed, we had just pre-written something in case, and it got pushed live by accident. I've been in enough newsrooms, and when you know who Nina Totenberg and how wired she is in to the Supreme Court, some would argue a little too cozy with the justices. For her to have that story, I suspect there's a little bit more there. And there's been a lot of speculation that Sam Alito is going to retire anyway. He's got a book coming out. The publication of that book is the day after the court starts its next term. All the signs are pointing to Sam Alito retiring. And if he does, Mike Lee is going, like I pointed out in the past, he almost got the seat that went to Brett Kavanaugh. He was a finalist. He was interviewed by Trump towards the end. Stay in the boat 30 on Instagram says Lee carries a copy of the Constitution in his pocket. True, but it's a weird version. It is a very weird version. It's sort of an extremist version of the Constitution. It is it's basically linked to Cleon Skousen and the John Birch Society, or what was the John Birch Society. Comes from a group called the Center for Constitutional Studies. That's a Cleon Skousen group. They are pretty extremist. They have a view of the Constitution that is a little more extreme than what we were taught in school. That's the version that he carries around. That's the one that he whipped out in the debate against Evan McMullin in 2022. Which violated the rules, because both sides, they had rules in this debate, and one of them was no props, but yet Mike Lee decided to pull out his Constitution and wave it around, breaking the rules. But yeah, that's where Mike Lee's Constitution. By Director on YouTube says Lee's Constitution is sovereign citizen BS. I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that it's certainly a weird interpretation of the Constitution. And it comes from a group that is pretty extreme, pretty far right. Think John Birch Society. And, there's been a lot of reporting that Mike Lee is so loathed in the Senate that his confirmation, if he were to be nominated for the Supreme Court, it would almost be a unanimous confirmation just to get him out of there, because they are getting tired of his antics in the Senate. But expect that chatter to start up again. Because Mike Lee, he clerked for Alito. He wants that. And, that's probably the reason why he's been acting like the way he is. But expect it. And as I said before, he almost got he was on the list. He was on the list of finalists. So when Trump first ran, he had a list of people who he would nominate. It was a Federalist Society list, obviously, but it was a list of people who he would nominate for the Supreme Court. Mike Lee was on it. Mike Lee's brother, who was then the Chief Justice of the Utah Supreme Court, he was also on that list. And obviously the first nomination in the Trump's term went to Justice Gorsuch. Then when Justice Kennedy stepped down, that nomination that went to Kavanaugh, it almost went to Mike Lee. Like, it came really close. Reporting at the time, Lee was a finalist. Trump interviewed him for the job. Ironically, the reason why Lee was not nominated at the time is because his views, his anti-abortion views, people thought that would be enough to derail his nomination. Funny how, the world we're living in now. But, Mike Lee's opposition to Roe v. Wade is what caused him to not get that nomination when Kavanaugh was nominated. After Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, Mike Lee, again, a finalist for that job, but they were saving it for Amy Coney Barrett because they wanted to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with a woman. But I suspect Mike Lee will once again be a top contender for a Supreme Court nomination if Justice Alito steps down, and I suspect he's going to. All the signs are pointing to it, just from the coverage and the fact that Nina Totenberg of NPR had a story that popped up online and then was taken down that basically said Alito was going to retire. And if you know anything about Nina Totenberg, she is way too cozy with the Supreme Court. She had a book that came out a couple of years ago where she talked about how she knew that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was sick, but didn't say anything to anyone because she was a friend, because they were friends. To me, that's appalling, first of all. Absolutely appalling that a reporter would have that kind of relationship with someone that they covered. But Nina Totenberg, she didn't see anything wrong with it. And she talked about how she would go to go to dinner parties with the justices. Really, really alarming stuff. How she kept her job with NPR, I'll never know. Because that's in my mind a pretty big ethical violation. Nathan Detroit on YouTube has a great joke. The ghost of RBG told Nina. Yeah, probably. Too cozy. Too cozy, as Kelgon says on TikTok. S'more077 on TikTok asks, any chance the Senate blocks a Mike Lee SCOTUS nomination? It wouldn't be the Democrats. The Democrats can't do anything. If the Republicans want to push through a nomination, they will. They have the majority. Democrats can't do a thing. Even with, the fate of Mitch McConnell being up in the air, Republicans still have a majority, even though we don't know where he is. He's been in the hospital, it's 17 days now, and we haven't heard from him. Although people now seem to know where he is. They believe he's at George Washington University Hospital because members of his security team have been seen there. But he's been in the hospital for 17 days. I'm not going to speculate on what happened to him, but it's got to be fairly serious if he's been in the hospital that long and we haven't heard anything from him. If you're just joining the show, big news. I think the best news today is that the 10th Circuit Court in Denver ruled in my favor in my appeal of the dismissal of my lawsuit against the legislature over their denial of a press pass. So now my lawsuit is back, and we're heading back down to the Utah District Court for more procedures, unless the legislature decides they just want to resolve it and give me a press pass. Because so far, I'm the only person they haven't given a press pass to, and the legal fight has already cost them almost $500,000. And it's going to cost them more if I win because they're going to be on the hook for my legal fees. We're not seeking any monetary damages. The only monetary damages we are seeking, I think, are $17.91, which is the year that the First Amendment was ratified. I believe that's what it is. It's a very symbolic monetary damage. I just want a press pass, man. I just want to be I just want to be able to ask questions at press conferences. That's all. That's it. We didn't have to do this. But that's why the First Amendment is there, and that's why the First Amendment is important. S'more077 says, could it happen before the midterms, or are we too close? We're never too close for a Supreme Court nomination. If you remember, the Senate, I think, slammed through Justice Barrett in like 5 weeks after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. So we're never too close. Now, I think that Alito is doing this because he sees that there's a chance that the Senate could lose, or the Republicans could lose control of the Senate in the midterms. The Senate is clearly on the table. but it's never too early. But I think the reason why Alito is going to retire, because he does not want to, because if the Democrats get a majority in the Senate, they can block any nomination. And if you have a justice pass away in office, the Democrats can hold that hostage. And don't forget, Clarence Thomas is in his 70s, just like Alito. If you remember, the Democrats urged Ruth Bader Ginsburg to retire and let Barack Obama nominate her replacement, but she stubbornly refused to do so. And now you can see where that got us. So yeah, there's always enough time. They moved Amy Coney Barrett through in 5 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks. It was really quick. Nathan Detroit says, Sam Alito is reporting to spend more time knowing nothing about his wife's flag choices. True. Well, he can know everything about him now. In fact, that appeal to heaven flag that his wife flew, which has become sort of a symbol of right-wing extremism. Did you know that Senator Lee has one outside of his office in Washington? Or it was the last time I saw a picture of the outside of his office. He's flying one. And they flew one at the, or they had one on stage at the Republican State Convention earlier this year. And when I reported that, a lot of people were like, no, it's about the revolution. You know, meanings of things can change. Meanings of things change all the time. You know, it's like the people who claim that, the KKK were all Democrats, so Democrats are the real racists. Well, yeah, that's how it used to be, but things change because some of us have been in a room with books, spent time reading books, reading history, so we understand that things change over time. But those kind of arguments are for the people who are made for people who are, shall we say, politically unsophisticated. Oh, the Supreme Court did something today that's basically going to do Citizens United on steroids. They ruled 6-3. Again, this is a money equals speech type of thing. Under FEC rules, there was a limit to the amount of money that could be donated to a political party, and political parties were not allowed to coordinate with candidates, or they had a limited amount of coordination with candidates on messaging. And the Supreme Court said that violates the First Amendment. So now political parties can take in unlimited amounts of money and they can coordinate with candidates and spend on their behalf. And so that is going to if you thought Citizens United was bad, this is Citizens United 2.0. This is really an alarming decision that's going to change politics ahead of the midterm, because it's just going to open the floodgates of money. They're going to use, instead of, dark money and dark money groups who are also going to be pouring money into races, now they're going to be spending it through political parties as well. And political parties are just going to flat out coordinate with candidates. These dark money groups are not supposed to coordinate with candidates, but the political parties are now going to be able to do it. And so it's just going to put that on steroids. As we talked about earlier, I will be fascinated to see how the Utah Senate operates now that Stuart Adams is gone or will be leaving. From what I'm hearing, the two main contenders to become the next Senate president are the current majority leader, Kirk Cullimore, and the former majority leader, Evan Vickers. And that's going to be a fascinating campaign behind closed doors. They hold that vote right after the November election. Stephanie Hollis is not the new Senate president. She does not get that seat just because she beat Stuart Adams. She is now part of the Republican caucus if she wins in November, and she most likely is going to, because that's a very Republican seat. We already look like we could have up to 4 new Republicans in the Senate, and there's going to be a big fight behind the scenes to be the next leader of the Senate. And if you know anything about Cullimore and Vickers, they have two very, very different styles. I think that if Cullimore is elected president, and that's who I would assume is probably going to win simply because he's the majority leader now, And he would have the backing of Stuart Adams, because I think Stuart Adams would still have some pull, not as much as he did in that caucus, but some pull. I think that he would operate a lot like Stuart Adams. It would look a lot like the way Adams did. I think if Vickers wins, that he would probably do things much more differently. And it probably wouldn't be in a way that you would see it on its face. But in the past, something that happens right now, it happens in both the House and the Senate. If leadership does not like your bill, it doesn't go anywhere. It does not get heard. And I think that that's something that Cullimore that is a process that Cullimore would continue. They would not hear a bill that they disagreed with or they didn't want to get on the floor. I think that Vickers would say them something along the lines of, or the argument would be, I disagree with what you're trying to do, but I'm going to give you a chance to go through the process and try to win enough support. Now, that would mean more bills would get introduced or more bills would have to go through committee. And that might, or at least that's an argument that one could be made. You know, I can't say for sure, but that would mean that there would be more, potentially more legislation that might get considered by committees, and they already consider a ton of bills right now. But I think, I guess there are arguments to be made for both styles. The gatekeeping before it gets anywhere, and then allowing them to try to convince the Rules Committee to get a bill out of rules, then convince a committee chair to put it on their agenda, and then try to win support on the floor and then do it again in the opposite body. And so I suspect that's what we would see. But I don't know. But that's what I'm hearing in terms of the two people who would be running for the next president of the Senate. But a lot of things changed after Stuart Adams lost. And like I said earlier, I do not think that it is a coincidence. I do not think it's a coincidence at all that Governor Cox felt confident enough to announce a statewide fireworks ban until after Adams lost that race. I'm going to be fascinated to see how this all plays out, because it has already started. It has already started to see who is going to be, the new leadership team. Because after the 2024 elections, Adams pretty much ousted the entire leadership team. If you remember, it was Evan Vickers as majority leader going between 2022 and 2024. Evans was the majority, Vickers was the majority leader, and then you had Don Ipson as the majority whip and Ann Milner as the assistant majority whip. And behind the scenes, there were some disagreements, and Adams decided he did not want them to be the leadership team anymore. So he threw his support behind Cullimore as majority leader and Mike McKell. And they are now the new leadership team in the Senate. And it's entirely possible we have a whole brand new leadership team in the Senate now that Stuart Adams has lost. That has changed a lot of stuff. How far those changes reach, it still remains to be seen. I think that that's going to do it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. I'm an independent journalist. Utah Political Watch is my website. We are completely funded by viewers, readers, listeners, the podcast, the live streams, and my journalism. The way that you can make more of this possible, the easiest way, and it doesn't cost you anything, you go to my website, utahpolitics.news, sign up for my newsletter. It's absolutely free. If you want to make it, so that more of these are possible, you can go to my website, again, utahpolitics.news, and throw some money in the tip jar or become a paying subscriber, and that helps fund this. Nathan Detroit asks, who was the district court judge in your case against the legislature? That was the Chief Judge Richard Shelby. A whole bunch of judges had to recuse themselves when they kept drawing the name, because, it's a random draw. But a whole bunch of judges recused themselves because of pre-existing relationships with the legislature, or for whatever reason. They didn't have to say who it was, but or they didn't have to say what their reasons were. So that's why it landed on Judge Shelby's desk, and he was the one who dismissed the case. But now we get to go again. And I don't know if we'll be assigned to Judge Shelby again or not. I know that my lawyers, as we had talked, I mean, one of the front, when this was all going down and they were having a hard time getting to even argue the merits of the case, my lawyers were saying that what should have happened is they should have just moved this entire case to another district in the 10th Circuit, like New Mexico or Colorado, and argued it there with judges who wouldn't have who wouldn't have conflicts that required their recusal. Because you saw the same thing when Phil Lyman filed lawsuit against the legislature, judges recused themselves. When Burgess Owens and Celeste Malloy filed a lawsuit against the legislature over the maps, or against the state over the maps, judges recused themselves. I was in federal court because of those pre-existing relationships. But it was Judge Shelby. But we'll see how that goes. The good news is we get to have this again. We get to go back and fight this again in court if the legislature continues. But as I said, they have 14 days to decide whether they want to have a rehearing in front of the 10th Circuit. No indication whether they'll do that or not. I expect we'll hear that sooner rather than later, but they have 14 days to ask for a rehearing. That would be the next step. If they don't, then we go back down to the district court for a rehearing. I did, I did happen to, when I got the news this morning that my case had been revived, I did, out of the goodness out of my heart, out of some courtesy, I did text soon-to-be former Representative Trevor Lee just to give him the news, because I know he's been very concerned about whether or not I would get access to the legislature through a press pass. I know he was very concerned about that issue. So just human to human, I texted him and said, hey, I know you've been very concerned about my lack of access to the legislature for a press pass. And so I just wanted to let you know that the 10th Circuit has revived my case. And so we'll be continuing the dismissal. They've overturned it on a couple of counts. So just so you know, it looks like at least one of us will be up at the legislature next year. Probably not going to be you, but I know you're very worried about that. So I texted him just to make sure that he knew about that. And as I've been saying, who's the mommy blogger now, Trevor? Who's the mommy blogger now? Because what's going to happen is I'll be covering the legislature and he'll be over on X yelling about immigration or whatever racist thing he's yelling about, like a mommy blogger. Anyway, just had to share that. I did share that information with him because I knew that he was wondering. I knew that he was worried. Thank you so much for your time and your attention and your support. Utah Political Watch is reader supported. We are supported by you, no corporations, no billionaires. If anything else pops up this week, if we get a big update on the election results, I know there's still some ballots out there that are outstanding. There's a couple of races that are still fairly close. We did get an update today from Weber County, and I did see that former Representative Carrie Gibson's wife, who tried to sue the other candidates in the race, or one of the other candidates in the race, for some reason towards the end, she ended up third in that race. So, ended up losing that primary. Maybe we'll see some more updates in the next couple of days. There's not very many ballots that are still outstanding. I will mention this. Earlier this week, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states can count ballots that arrive after Election Day if they are postmarked, but only if state law allows it. Here in Utah, that's not an issue because the legislature changed the rules. So your ballot has to arrive in the counting center at the county clerk's office by the close of polls on Election Day. So even though we have mail-in ballots, even if it's postmarked by it used to be I think it was the day before the election, they still had to count it. That's not the case anymore. It has to show up. So that Supreme Court ruling about counting ballots that come in after Election Day, it doesn't apply here in Utah. I think there are 35 states that have some sort of rule that says, if it's not received by election day. So that ruling doesn't really change a lot of stuff, and it certainly doesn't have any impact here in Utah. That'll do it for today's program. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I appreciate all of you. A quick reminder, if you've enjoyed the show, hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. And if you've got 30 seconds, leave a rating and review. It's free, it costs you nothing, and it helps us grow our audience. And as always, Utah Political Watch is reader-supported. No corporations, no billionaires, just you. If you want to see more of this kind of accountability journalism, head on over to utahpolitics.news, sign up for our free newsletter, and if you're able to, become a paying subscriber or leave something in the tip jar. That's what keeps this going. Thanks again for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time.